I want to say, before anything else, that I am not a superstitious man. I've worked with my hands my whole life. I've been in crawl spaces and attics and basements at every hour of the night, and the only things I've ever been afraid of were black mold and bad wiring. I don't watch scary movies because I think they're stupid. I want you to hold on to that while I tell you this, because it matters. It matters that the man this happened to was the last man it should have happened to. 2 years ago, I got laid off from the plant where I'd worked for 11 years. Severance ran out faster than I expected, the way it always does, and by October I was taking anything. Odd jobs, deliveries, a week of demolition cleanup that wrecked my back. Then a buddy of mine, Carl, sends me a listing he found. Night watchman, $12 over minimum. 8-hour shift, 10 at night to 6 in the morning, 5 nights a week. The listing said the property was a decommissioned residential care facility awaiting demolition. What that means in plain language is a dead nursing home. The place was called Merrow House, and it sat about 9 miles outside of town on a county road that doesn't get plowed first, second, or third in winter. 3 stories of yellow brick, built in the 50s, closed for good about 6 years before I ever set foot in it. The company that owned it had gone under in some scandal, though I didn't know the details then, and the property had been tied up in insurance litigation ever since. Nobody could tear it down until the lawyers finished eating each other, and until they did, the insurance carrier required a warm body on site overnight. Vandalism, liability, copper thieves. That was the whole job. Be the warm body. The interview took 11 minutes. It was in a strip mall office 40 minutes away, with a man named Prentice who worked for the property management firm. He was maybe 60, gray suit, gray face, the kind of guy who looks like he's been tired since the Carter administration. He didn't ask me much. He looked at my ID, looked at me, and slid a single laminated page across the desk. "These are the duties," he said. "Read them now, in front of me." I remember thinking that was odd. Read them now, in front of me? But I read them. I can still recite that page. I've thought about it enough times since. 1. Arrive no later than 10 p.m. Sign in at the front office. 2. Conduct a walking round of the building every hour, on the hour, beginning at 11 p.m. and ending at 5 a.m. 7 rounds total. 3. Each round follows the marked route. Front office, east wing ground floor, west wing ground floor, second floor east to west, third floor west to east. Stairwell B down, back to office. Initial the logbook at the office after each round, with the time. 4. If you miss a round, do not attempt to make it up. Wait for the next hour and resume the schedule. 5. Do not prop open any interior doors. 6. The building's original systems are decommissioned. Ignore any activity from decommissioned systems. 7. Personnel are not to remain in the east wing, third floor, longer than the round requires. I finished reading and looked up at Prentice and said something like, "What kind of activity would a decommissioned system have?" He said, "Old buildings settle. Old wiring holds charge. You'll hear clicks, sometimes a light. It's nothing." And then he said the thing I should have paid more attention to. He said it the way you'd recite a phone number you memorized decades ago and never forgot even though you wanted to. He said, "The job is the rounds. Do the rounds, initial the book, and the night passes. The rounds are for the insurance. The insurance needs to see a continuous record of attendance. Continuous. You understand? I said, sure. Continuous record. Insurance. Got it. He asked if I could start Thursday. I asked what happened to the last guy, just making conversation, and Prentice did this thing where he clicked his pen twice, cap on, cap off, and said, he stopped coming in. That was all. He stopped coming in. Like the man had evaporated. I figured he found something better. Everybody's always finding something better. I started that Thursday. Let me tell you about Merrow House the way I saw it that first night, before I knew anything. Because I want you to see it clean. You come up the county road in the dark and there's nothing, just fields, a windbreak of pines, the occasional mailbox catching your headlights like an animal's eye, and then the building just arrives. It's set back maybe 200 yards behind a chain-link fence, and it's bigger than it has any right to be out there. 3 stories, wide as a high school, with 2 wings coming off a central block, so the whole thing is shaped like a squared-off letter C, arms open toward the road, like it's waiting to receive you. In daylight, the brick is a jaundiced yellow. At night, with just my headlights on it, it was the color of an old tooth. Most of the ground floor windows were boarded. The upper windows weren't, and they were black in that specific way that empty buildings are black. Not dark, like a room where the lights are off, but dark like paint. Flat. My first night, driving up the gravel to the gate, I caught myself checking those windows in a row, left to right, the way you'd scan a crowd for a face you know. I didn't know why I did that. I chalked it up to nerves on a new job. The gate had a padlock and I had the key. The front doors had a padlock and chain and I had those keys too. Inside, the power was partially on. The litigation required life safety minimums, which meant a handful of emergency lights, 1 working outlet in the front office, and the panel for the temporary alarm system by the door. Everything else was dead. No heat except a space heater in the office. No water except 1 working toilet behind the old reception desk, which I was told about with great ceremony like a perk. The front office had been the administrator's office once. Now it had a fold-in table, a fold-in chair, the space heater, a gooseneck lamp, and the logbook. I want to describe the logbook carefully. It was a green ledger, the old-fashioned kind with a sewn spine and a red cloth corner, and it was maybe 2/3 full. The first entry was dated more than 5 years back. Every page was ruled into columns. Date, time, initials, notes, hundreds of nights, thousands of rounds. Most of the notes column was empty, or said things like all quiet, or raccoon at loading dock, or snow. A record of nothing happening, night after night after night, in the handwriting of maybe a dozen different men. You could watch the handwriting change over the years like sediment layers. Some guys printed, some scrawled. One guy, for about 4 months in the second year, drew a tiny check mark instead of writing all quiet. And I felt like I knew him. That guy. An efficient man. My kind of man. The most recent entries from the last watchman, the one who stopped coming in, were in a tight, careful hand. His initials were TV. His last entry was dated 7 weeks before my first night. I noticed that right away. 7 weeks. Which meant for 7 weeks, no one had walked this building at night. The continuous record Prentice was so worked up about had a 7-week hole in it. I noticed something else, too. but I didn't think anything of it at the time. TV's final entry, 4 a.m., had nothing in the notes column, but the entry before it, 3 a.m., did. In that tight, careful hand, it said, "Room 14, warm again." I read it, and I remember actually smiling, because the whole building was cold as a meat locker, and the idea of any room in it being warm sounded like a luxury. I figured room 14 had a busted steam pipe or caught heat off some conduit. I signed the book, 10:04 p.m., my initials, DR, and I set my thermos on the folding table, and I waited for 11 o'clock so I could walk my first round. I did the job for 4 months. I want to lay it out the way it happened, in order, because the order is the whole thing. Nothing about this was sudden. That's what nobody understands when I try to tell it. It came on the way the dark comes on in the fall, a few minutes earlier every day, so gradually that you never catch the moment it happens. And then one afternoon, you look up at 5 o'clock and the light is simply gone. Now, let's get into the first few weeks. The route took about 25 minutes if you walked it honest, which I did. Front office, then the east wing ground floor, a long corridor of resident rooms, doors mostly standing open, numbers still screwed to the frames. Then back through the central block, past the dining hall with its stacked chairs under dust sheets, and down the west wing. Then stairwell A up to the second floor, the whole length of it east to west, then up to the third floor and back west to east, then down stairwell B, which spits you out by the old nurses' station near the office. That first round, 11 o'clock, first night. I'm not going to pretend it wasn't creepy. Of course it was creepy. It was a dead nursing home at night. My flashlight beam sliding across those open doorways, each one a little box of black. Wheelchairs still parked in some of the rooms. Beds in a few, stripped to the plastic mattress covers. In one room on the second floor, there was still a "Get Well" card standing open on the windowsill. Sun bleached to nothing. Just the ghost of a cardinal on the front. 6 years that card had been standing there. Whoever it was for, the odds are they're gone now, one way or another, and their card is still holding its little vigil in an empty room. That's the kind of thing the place did to your head. Not fear. Melancholy. That first month, the feeling I had most nights wasn't scared. It was sad. The specific sadness of institutional places where people ended. You'd pass a corkboard with a 2019 activity calendar still pinned to it. Bingo, 2 p.m., sunroom, and it would just sit in your chest. I got fast at the rounds. Not sloppy. Fast. I learned which doors would be open, which was almost all of them, and which were locked, which were the med room, the records room, and both stairwell roof accesses. I learned the sounds. This is important. Every old building has a vocabulary, and if you spend 8 silent hours a night in one, you learn it whether you want to or not. Merrow House ticked as it cooled. The west wing had a loose piece of flashing that buzzed when the wind came from the north. Stairwell B whistled at the third floor door, a thin note like breath over a bottle. The boarded windows on the ground floor thumped softly in gusts, a fat, padded sound, like something leaning against them from outside. I cataloged all of it in the first 3 weeks. I could sit in the office with my coffee and tell you what the weather was doing without looking, just by what the building said. I tell you this so you understand. When the building started saying new things, I knew. I wasn't some jumpy kid mistaking a raccoon for a ghost. I knew that building's voice like I knew my own mother's, and I know exactly when it changed. The first new sound came in my 5th week. It was a Tuesday, around 1:40 in the morning, between rounds. I was in the office with the heater going, doing a crossword, and I heard, very distinctly, from deep in the building, a bell. Not an alarm, nothing electronic. A small bell, struck once. Ding. The sound a front desk bell makes. The sound was so ordinary, so polite, that my brain accepted it for 2 or 3 full seconds before it rejected it. I actually thought, someone's at the desk. And then I thought, what desk? And the hair went up on my arms. I sat still and listened for a long time. Nothing. Just the ticking, the flashing buzzing faintly, the ordinary vocabulary. When I walked my 2 a.m. round, I took it slow, and I looked at everything, and there was nothing. No bell anywhere that I could find. The old nurses' stations had call boards, not bells. I wrote in the log 2 a.m. DR, and in the notes column, after sitting there a minute with the pen, I wrote, sound like desk bell, east wing, nothing found. I remember feeling embarrassed writing it, like the men in the earlier pages would judge me. That was the other thing I'd started doing by then, and I might as well admit it. Reading the logbook. Not just the recent stuff, all of it. 8 silent hours is a lot of hours, and the book was the only thing to read that I hadn't brought myself. I got to know those men through their entries. The checkmark guy. A guy with initials RO who noted the weather every night like a farmer. Clear, sleet, wind southwest. Years of nothing, night after night, and I found it comforting, right up until I started finding the entries that weren't nothing. They were rare. That's what made them worse. You'd go 40 pages of all quiet, and then, in the middle of some February 4 years gone, 3 a.m., lights on 3rd floor east when I came up drive. Off by time I got inside. Electric is dead up there. Noted. Different guy, 10 months later. Heard the doors tonight. Like someone closing them one after another down the hall. East wing. Went and looked. All doors exactly like I left them. Not doing that walk twice. And RO, the weather farmer, whose notes were never more than 3 words, has one entry, one, in his whole tenure that breaks form. It says, counted the doors on 3 East, 41, counted twice. Nobody counts doors twice for no reason. I sat with that entry a long time, and then I flipped forward, because I remembered something, and I found it in TV's tight, careful hand, dated 3 years after RO's. 3 East door count, 42, will recount tomorrow. The next night's entry, TV again, notes column, 41, I miscounted yesterday. And then 2 weeks of all quiet, and then the entry that I'd first taken as a joke about a steam pipe. Room 14, warm again. Again. I hadn't clocked that word the first time. Again. Here is where I made my first mistake, and I want to be honest about it because I've had a long time to think about which choices were mistakes. My first mistake was this. I counted the doors. You'd have done it too. Don't tell me you wouldn't. It was a Thursday, my 11 p.m. round, and when I came up stairwell A onto the 3rd floor east, I just counted as I walked. Left side and right side, every numbered resident door from the stairwell to the elbow of the building where east becomes the central block. It's a long corridor. Emergency light at the far end throwing that low orange that doesn't so much light a hallway as stain it. I walked and counted, flashlight touching each door like I was telling a rosary. 41. Room numbers on the third floor east ran 1 through 40, 20 aside, plus the unnumbered linen room by the stairwell. 41 doors. It matched RO. It matched TV's recount. I felt honest to God, relieved, and also stupid for feeling relieved. And I went down and initialed the book and drank my coffee and did the crossword. I counted again the next night. Habit forms fast on the night shift. You'll ritualize anything to break up the hours. 41. And the night after. 41. It became part of the round, the way you might always touch a door frame on your way through it. Up stairwell A, count the east hall, 41, on with the night. For 3 weeks, 41. Then, on a Sunday night in early December, December the 7th, and I have the date because it's in the book, I came up the stairwell at 1 a.m., third round of the night, and I counted 42. I want to walk you through the next 90 seconds carefully, because everyone imagines they know what they do, and everyone imagines wrong. You don't gasp. You don't run. What happens is your brain, which is a machine for making things normal, instantly starts offering you exits. You counted the linen room twice. You counted a shadow. There's a maintenance panel you caught in the beam and mistook for a door. And these exits sound so reasonable that the fear can't get traction. So you do the reasonable thing. You count again. I stood at the stairwell end of that corridor, and I counted the doors again, slowly, out loud, in a whisper, touching each one with the flashlight beam. And the whole time I counted, the building had gone quiet in a way I had never once heard it. No ticking. No whistle at the stairwell door. Though the wind was up when I'd driven in, the corridor was as silent as the inside of your own skull, and my whisper going up it, 9, 10, 11, sounded obscene, like whispering in a church. And I got to the end, and I had counted 42. And I stood there and felt every one of the 200 yards between me and my truck. Here's what I couldn't do. I could not tell which door was extra. Do you understand what I'm saying? It's not that there was some obvious wrong door glowing at me. Every door looked like every other door, same brown laminate, same steel frame, same little number plate. And the numbers ran 1 to 40, same as always. And the linen room sat unnumbered by the stairwell, same as always. And yet when I counted, I got 42. And when I tried to reconcile the count with the numbers, my head hurt. Actually hurt. A pressure behind the eyes. The way it hurts to look at one of those optical illusions that flips between two shapes. The corridor added up to itself perfectly right up until you measured it, and then it didn't, and it knew it didn't, and the doors were all closed. That's the detail that finally cut through the reasonable exits and put the cold in me for real. Every door on that corridor was closed. They were never closed. They stood open, had stood open for 6 years, most of them sagging on their hinges into the rooms. I had walked past their open black mouths 150 nights. Now the corridor was a smooth row of shut brown doors, and my brain had been so busy counting that I had walked half its length before I understood what was different. Rule 4. If you miss a round, do not attempt to make it up. Wait for the next hour and resume the schedule. I did not run. I want that on the record. I walked the rest of the round, third floor west, down stairwell B, every step with the back of my neck crawling like something was pacing me one floor up. And I got to the office, and I initialed the book, 1:00 a.m., Dr. And in the notes column my hand wrote 3 East 42, and I looked at the handwriting, and it barely looked like mine. Then I sat in that office with the heater roaring and the lamp on, and I did not read, and I did not do the crossword. I sat facing the door, and I listened to the building not make any of its sounds, and at 2:00 a.m., because the job is the rounds, I stood up and I walked it again. The doors on 3rd East were open, all of them, standing open into the dark rooms exactly the way they had stood for 6 years. I counted 41. I know how this sounds. I knew how it sounded then, which is why I did not call Prentice, and did not quit, and did not tell Carl or my sister or anyone. A 53-year-old man does not call his employer to report a door surplus. What I did instead was what I imagine R.O. did, and the door closer guy, and TV, and every other set of initials in the green book confronted with something his life had not equipped him to file. I put it in the notes column, and I let the nights stack back up on top of it, and I collected my check, and for a while, that worked. 10 quiet nights. The building's old vocabulary came back. The ticking, the flashing, the whistle, and I was actually glad to hear it. The way you're glad to hear a snorer once you've spent a night with someone whose breathing keeps stopping. Then the call board lit up. I need to explain the call board, because if you've never worked in or visited an old care facility, you may not know what I mean. Beside the office at the ground floor nurses' station, there was a panel mounted on the wall, a grid of little plastic windows, each one labeled with a room number, each one with a bulb behind it. When a resident pressed the call button by their bed, their room's window lit up and a tone sounded at the station, and a nurse would see the number and go. Every floor had a station and a board. Old technology, hardwired, dead simple, also just dead. The system had decommissioned when the facility closed. I'd been told this. Rule 6. The building's original systems are decommissioned. Ignore any activity from decommissioned systems. I had also personally seen, in the basement during my orientation walk through with Prentice's site man, the electrical room where whole banks of breakers stood open with red "Do Not Close" tags zip tied to them, and I'd been shown, specifically, the breaker for the nurse call system. He made a point of it, I realize now. Open, tagged. A hardwired system with no power is not a system, it's wall decoration. It was a Friday night, 4 rounds done, 2:47 in the morning by the watch I kept on the folding table. I was at the table. The office door was open, and through it I had a clear view across the hall to the ground floor nurses' station and its board. There was a tone. One tone, flat, dull, a C note off a cheap doorbell, a sound I had never heard in that building and yet recognized instantly, the way you'd recognize a rotary phone. My head came up, and across the hall, on that dead board, one little window was lit. Warm and yellow and steady, like it had always been lit, like it was the most natural thing in the world. I did not have to walk over to know the number, but I walked over. My legs took me. I don't recall deciding. Up close, the little window was warm. I held my fingers near the plastic and felt heat coming off it. off a bulb wired to a breaker that stood open and tagged 2 floors below my feet. And behind the plastic, printed in the brittle brown label tape of 50 years ago, was the number 14. Room 14 is on the 3rd floor, East Wing. I stood in front of that board for, I genuinely don't know. At some point the light went out. No click, no fade. Out, and the board was a dead grid of dark little windows again, and the hallway was cold. And I became aware that I had been standing there long enough for my coffee to stop steaming on the table behind me. Ignore any activity from decommissioned systems. I have thought about that sentence more than I have thought about any sentence in my life. About the word choice. Not the systems are dead, not the systems don't work. Ignore any activity. You write that sentence because there is activity. You write that sentence because someone, at some point, did not ignore it, and something about what followed made it into the rules. The laminated page wasn't telling me the systems were safe. It was telling me they were not my business. At 3 a.m., I walked my round, because the job is the rounds. And on the 3rd floor east, standing in the corridor, doors all open, the count 41. I know because God helped me, I counted. I stopped outside room 14, and I looked in. I had looked into that room 150 nights. I knew it like every other room. Bed frame with a bare plastic mattress, a window with the blind hanging crooked, a wardrobe with one door open on darkness, a wheeled overbed table parked in the corner. That is what the room held every night I had ever looked. The room was the same that night. Exactly the same. I want to be careful here, because this is the part where people expect me to say I saw something, and if I had seen something, a figure, a face, anything, I think in a strange way that would have been easier. Seeing something gives you an event. What I got was worse. What I got was the overwhelming, cell-deep certainty of interruption. You know the feeling when you walk into a room where 2 people have just stopped talking about you. The air still shaped around the conversation. That. The room was the same as always, and it was mid-something, and my arrival had paused it, and everything in it. The bed, the crooked blind, the black gap of the wardrobe, was waiting, with a patience that had nothing human in it, for me to move along so it could resume. And it was warm. The whole building sat around 40 degrees that night. The doorway of room 14 was warm the way a bed is warm when someone has just gotten out of it. I moved along. Rule 7. Personnel are not to remain in the East Wing, 3rd floor, longer than the round requires. For once, a rule and my body were in perfect agreement. I finished the round, initialed the book, and in the notes column I wrote what TV had written, because there was nothing else true to write. Room 14, warm again. The next day, on my own time, I did what I should have done in week 1. I found out what Merrow House actually was. The scandal that killed the company was easy to find. It made the regional papers. Understaffing, falsified records, a state investigation, license pulled. The whole corporate skeleton picked apart in bankruptcy court. The facility got its closure order in the spring and was given 90 days to transfer every resident out. 100 and some residents, scattered to facilities all over the state. By all accounts, the wind down was a mess. Staff quitting faster than they could be replaced. Records in chaos. And remember, falsified records were the whole scandal. agency temps who didn't know the residents working the final weeks. You already know where this is going. I can feel you knowing. But I need you to have the details I have. Her name was Edith Marchetti. She was 91 years old, a widow, no children, a dementia diagnosis going back a decade. Her transfer paperwork said she went out on the second to last day on a van with 4 other residents to a facility upstate. The facility upstate had her on an intake list. Somebody's initials were on the transfer form. The van driver's log showed 5 pickups. The receiving facility's intake nurse counted 4 people off that van. And because the paperwork war was already raging and everyone was a temp, and the intake list was one of 900 pieces of paper that week, the discrepancy sat in a folder. For 19 days, they found her when the demolition surveyors did their first walk-through of the sealed building. 3rd floor, east wing. She had not stayed in her room. That was the detail the coverage kept circling, the detail I can't put down. The surveyors found evidence of her all through that corridor. She had moved from room to room, the whole length of 3rd East, over what the coroner estimated was somewhere between 1 and 2 weeks, blankets dragged from room to room. Every door on the corridor found closed. A 100-pound woman with dementia in a dark sealed building had gone down that hallway closing the doors, or opening and closing them, or... Nobody could say what the doors were about, and the papers didn't dwell there. But I dwell there. I dwell there every night of my life. They found her at the nurses' station, 3rd floor east. She was at the counter. In the dark, at the end, with whatever the disease and the fear and the hunger had left her. Edith Marchetti had gone to the nurses' station, because that is where you go. That is where help is. 91 years old and everything else stripped away, and the last thing her mind held onto was the shape of the promise that building had made her. Press the button and someone comes. Ring the bell and someone comes. Her room, for the 11 years she lived at Merrow House, was room 14. You would think, knowing what I knew now, that I'd have quit. I've asked myself 1,000 times why I didn't, and the honest answer is layered like everything honest is. Layer 1. I needed the money, and it's easy to underestimate what a man will walk past for $400 a week when the alternative is nothing. Layer 2. Nothing had hurt me. Months in that building, and the sum total of events was a bell, a light, a warm doorway, and an arithmetic problem. Layer 3. And this is the one that shames me, because it's the one that was actually in the driver's seat. I had started to feel that the rounds mattered, not to the insurance company, to the building. Do the rounds, initial the book, and the night passes. Somewhere along the way that had stopped being a job description and become a covenant. I walked, and I signed, and the building let the night pass. I had the feeling, and I could not have defended it in daylight. But at 3 a.m., it had the weight of physical law, that the walking and the signing were holding something in a shape. The way ritual holds all fragile things in shape, and that the shape was load-bearing. 7 weeks the building had stood empty before I came. 7 weeks of missed rounds. I thought about that gap all the time now. I thought about what it might have felt like, from the inside of that building, to have the footsteps stop. It was the third RD week of January when I missed the round, and I want to be clear that it was not nerves and it was not neglect. It was a pot of chili. I'd eaten before my shift at a truck stop that I will not name, but will also never forgive. And by 1:30 a.m., I was in serious trouble, and I will spare you everything except the outcome. When I could finally stand upright and look at my watch, it was 2:26 in the morning. The 2 a.m. round was not walked. First round I had ever missed. 200 some nights of a perfect record, gone for a bowl of chili. Rule 4. Do not attempt to make it up. Wait for the next hour and resume the schedule. I sat in the office from 2:26 to 3 a.m., and those 34 minutes were the longest continuous stretch of fear I had experienced in my life to that point. Nothing happened. That was what was unbearable about it. The building made none of its sounds. None. The deep, new silence. The counting silence. And I sat in the lamplight with my skin crawling and the certainty growing in me, notch by notch, that the silence was attention. That somewhere in that building, something that had gotten used to my footsteps the way I had gotten used to the ticking pipes, had noticed the gap in the pattern, had lifted its head, if it had a head, was listening back. At 3 a.m. exactly, I stood up and walked the round, and the round was fine. Doors open. Count, 41. Room 14, cold as every other room. I have never been so grateful to be so cold. I came down stairwell B, and I crossed to the office, and I sat down and pulled the green book toward me to sign, and that is when the floor went out from under my life. The 3 a.m. line was blank, waiting for me. But the 2 a.m. line was not. 2 a.m. DR. My initials. In handwriting that was almost mine. I want to be precise, because I have spent hundreds of hours since then looking at those two letters, and almost is the whole horror of it. It was my D and my R the way your voice on a recording is your voice. Recognizable, technically accurate, and wrong in a way you feel in your stomach before you can name it. The pressure was wrong. My initials look like that when I sign fast, but they were written slow. I could see it in the ink, the deliberateness. Someone or something had sat in my chair, at my table, under my lamp. In the 34 minutes I was 40 feet away behind a door, and had studied how I make my letters, and had made them carefully, the way you'd copy a signature, the way you'd practice being someone. And in the notes column, in that same slow, almost my handwriting, it said, "All quiet." I did not sleep that day. I sat at my kitchen table at home with the sun coming up, and I thought about the 7-week gap before my first night, and I thought about TV, the tight, careful hand, the man who stopped coming in. And then I got my coat, and I drove to the strip mall, and I walked into Prentice's office without an appointment. And I put the question to him straight. What happened to the last guy? Not the pen-click answer. The real answer. Prentice looked at me for a long time. He looked tired the way a coastline looks tired. And he said, "Which one?" I said the last one. TV. He said, "Tom Vasek?" He stopped coming in. Click, cap on. His car was in the lot, though. Click, cap off. For a while, we'd get the log entries. And he looked at me to see if I understood, and I understood, and he saw that I understood. The book had gone on being signed after Tom Vasek stopped coming in. Rounds walked by nobody, initialed in a tight, careful hand, all quiet, all quiet, all quiet, until somebody from the management company finally drove out, and the entries stopped the day they took the book, that book, the green book, my book, into the office for 2 weeks. And when they needed a new watchman, they put the book back. The insurance needs a continuous record, Prentice said. It doesn't much matter to the insurance who keeps it. And then, quieter, the only kind thing he ever said to me. It matters to me. Keep your rounds, son. It only writes when you leave a blank. All right, let's get to the last night. I gave my notice that same day, 2 weeks, because I am my father's son, and you work your notice. And Prentice nodded like he'd heard it before. Because of course he had. He'd heard everything before. And he asked only one thing. Don't miss any more rounds. 14 nights, 98 rounds. I walked 97 of them clean. The last night was the 6th of February. Snow coming down since dusk. The county road unplowed. My truck the only tracks in it. The building came up in my headlights with every window catching the snow light. And for the first time, it didn't look like a tooth to me. It looked patient. I signed in at 10:02. The office was cold. The heater took an hour to matter. Rounds at 11, 12, 1, 2, all quiet. The true quiet, ticking and whistle and thump. The building talking its ordinary talk. And I let myself think the thing you should never let yourself think, which is, almost done. At 2:51 a.m., the bell rang. Not the call board tone. The bell, the desk bell, the small, polite ding from my 5th week, but not once this time. It rang once, and then again, unhurried, spaced out like a person ringing and waiting, someone standing at a counter with all the time in the world, and it was coming from above me. 3rd floor east. Rule 4 says a missed round can't be made up, but nothing in the rules says a round can't start early. And I have wondered every day since whether what I did next was courage or whether it was the building, pulling on the covenant, reeling in the pattern it had been feeding for months. Because I did not sit in the office until 3 o'clock. I took the flashlight and I went up stairwell A toward the bell. It rang the whole way up. Patient. Spaced. I could hear, under it, as I climbed, the other sound starting, the one the log had warned me about years before I ever signed it. The doors, one after another down the corridor above me, the soft, institutional click of latches, doors closing in sequence, coming from the far end of 3rd East toward the stairwell, toward me. And here is what my body understood on those stairs before my mind caught up. The understanding I have never once been able to unknow since. The doors weren't being shut against me. They were being shut behind something. The way a nurse shuts doors down a hallway as she goes, doing her rounds. I came out of the stairwell onto 3rd East, and the corridor ran away from me under the orange emergency light, and every door I could see stood closed, and the closing sound went on ahead in the dark past the light's reach. Click, click, and the bell had stopped, and the air in that hallway was warm, warm all the way through, warm like a ward with the heat on and the residents sleeping, and there was a smell. I had braced for something terrible, and I want you to understand that what I got was worse than terrible. It smelled like dinner trays and laundry soap and hand lotion. It smelled like the living version of the place, It smelled like the promise. Press the button and someone comes. And down at the far end of the corridor, at the third-floor nurse's station, in the dead black past the last emergency light, something was waiting at the counter. I couldn't see it. I need to be honest to the end. I could not see it. The dark down there was the flat paint dark of the windows, and my flashlight, when I finally forced my arm up, reached 80 feet and simply stopped. The beam ending in the air like it hit water. But I could feel the weighting, the way you feel a stare on the back of your neck, and I could hear, barely at the bottom of the silence, a small, dry, rhythmic sound. A bell being touched. Not rung. Touched. A palm resting on it, patting it softly, without the force to make it sound. The way you press a call button long after you've stopped believing in it. The way hope outlives the person carrying it. She was still waiting for someone to come. I want to tell you I said something. I've rehearsed, in the years since, what a braver man says into that hallway. That he's sorry. That it wasn't right what happened to her. That somebody did finally come, even if it was 6 years too late and only a broke ex-factory hand with a flashlight. But the truth is, the corridor was warm, and the dark was watching, and my body turned around and took me down stairwell A with my heart going like a fist on a door. And I sat in the office until 3 with every light I had turned on, and at 3, because the job is the rounds, because the record must be continuous, because by then I finally understood who the record was for, I walked. 3rd floor east. All doors open. Cold. 41. Room 14, black and still and empty as a pulled tooth. I initialed every round to the end of the shift. At 6 a.m. I signed out, and on my way through the notes column of my last line, my hand stopped, and I thought about every man in that book. All of us walking her hallway 1 hour at a time for 6 years, the only visitors she ever got. And I wrote the only thing that was true, and the only thing I had to give her. All quiet. Someone was here. That was 2 winters ago. Merrow House is down now. The lawsuit settled that spring, and by August it was a field of graded dirt behind the same chain-link fence. I drove out and watched some of the demolition from the road. And I am not ashamed to say I was watching the 3rd floor when it came down, the east end. And I don't know what I expected to see in all that dropping brick and dust. Nothing. There was nothing. It was just a building coming apart. The way I'd been telling myself for months, it was just a building. I'd like to end there. You can feel that I'm not going to. 2 things. The first is small. When the management company closed out the site, Prentice mailed me my last stub, and in the envelope with no note was the green logbook. I don't know why he sent it to me. Maybe you don't throw a thing like that away, and maybe you don't keep it either, and I was the youngest name in it. It's in my closet, on the top shelf, and I have not opened it since the day it came, because the record only needs keeping when there's a blank, and there are no blanks. I check. That's the small thing. I check. The second thing is the reason I'm telling you this at all. Since Merrow House, I sleep badly, which you'd expect, and I wake most nights around 3, which you'd also expect. The shift got into my bones and never left. That part I've made peace with. I lie in the dark in my little house 9 miles from where a nursing home used to be, and I wait for sleep to come back around, and most nights it does. But some nights, and not often, 11 times in 2 years by my count. And yes, I count. Some nights, at the bottom of the hour, in the far end of the house, I hear a door close, softly, politely. The latch pressed in the way a nurse does it, so as not to wake anyone. And then, a little closer, another. They tore the building down. But the rounds were never the buildings. I understand that now. The rounds belong to whoever keeps them, and I kept them longer than anyone. And somewhere in the dark of my own hallway, the pattern I fed for 400 nights is still being walked, hour by hour, door by door, closing them gently behind itself as it comes. I keep a notebook on my nightstand now, a green one. I write the date every evening, and when I wake at 3, I write all quiet, and in the morning the page says what I wrote and nothing more, and that is how I know the covenant is holding. Every morning for 2 years, the page has held only my own handwriting, except this morning. This morning, under my entry, in letters that are almost mine, it says, "All quiet. Someone was here." And the room where I sleep when I woke today was warm